Welcome to the That Don't Fit podcast, a podcast where we're dedicated to talking about life and life's real issues that cross racial and generational lines. My name is Jared Torrance, and I'm here with my co-host, Andy Farmer. We're friends, we're pastors, we're wanting to help people talk and process life in a crazy world. Welcome to the conversation.
So this is our first show, and we thought we'd let you know why we're calling this That Don't Fit. There's a few reasons. One reason is because we feel like there's just a lack of good conversation across generational lines. Most people I know of, if it's not family, don't really know anybody who's of a different generation than that they talk to. Basically, You talk in your generation, and that's where you get all your input. That's where you get your perspective. And the idea that it's just really difficult to talk to somebody who doesn't have that background, doesn't come from where you come from, is from a whole different generation. So what we wanted to do was to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. I'm going to represent the older group because I am older, in my 60s, and JT is going to represent the younger guys because you are
29.
29.
Yes.
There you go.
I'm 29.
That's shocking.
Another thing that don't fit is having conversations that cross racial lines, and that's what we're doing here. We want to model how to communicate about race and ethnicity and challenges that come with that, and challenges that come with minority cultures. Mm-hmm. And I will be playing the part of the black guy because I am black.
And I am very white, and have been that way my whole life. So we thought it'd be great. There's another reason too. While we're doing this, we're both pastors in the same church.
Yeah.
So why we would do a podcast, because this really isn't sort of our function as pastors of the church. We're doing it for our church members, but we're really not kind of coming in here and saying, we're your pastors, we're doing a podcast.
Right.
And that's kind of why.
Yeah, because we want our Sunday mornings are going to address things of ethnic justice and different things like that occasionally, but that's not going to be the main consistent focus of our Sunday mornings. And there's certain things that we want to get into specifically through these conversations and through this podcast that wouldn't be the normal route of preaching and teaching to the church in the way that we're doing that. And so we thought this would be another way to get to some specifics that wouldn't normally come up on a Sunday morning, to get into certain things that we can talk through and dialogue about, while also, by God's grace, and hopefully model how to have conversations around these things, which also wouldn't be able to happen on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. It's kind of like the way we look at things when we're preaching or teaching or communicating to the church in our role as pastors. We have to be very careful how we say things, what we say. We always want to be, and certainly biblically we always want to be, but we're aware at that point we're leading the church. We're communicating in a sense on behalf of what God would have us to say for the church. And so in this kind of context, we want to have conversation. We want to be able to just talk. What we hope is that there isn't a huge difference between what we say on Sundays and this, but but we can get into it differently. We can talk about it differently. We can talk about our own experiences.
Yeah.
We can relate to the Bible as just how we're interacting with what the Bible's saying to us personally. So there's a whole different sort of way of communicating that we can use this for. And we really hope that what people get is not just the content, but also some tone. They get a sense of how do you interact with people? How do you talk about things? How do you listen?
Yeah.
God, I hope I listen.
Yes.
It isn't a strength, but I hope I do it. But just so that we, our hope is that if we do this over time, people kind of check in, they'll learn how to relate over hard things.
Yes.
So that's kind of the other goal, is just to give some modeling there as well. So JT, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I am 29 years old. I've been married to my wife, Bethany, for 7 years. We have 3 children, 1 on the way, and I think 2 weeks. I think baby Carolyn is
you should probably know that.
Is supposed to be making her arrival. Yes. So yes, I've got what do I have? 6-year-old, 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and then like someone coming in about 2 weeks. So that's my family. I grew up in Ohio. My family traveled a lot when I was younger, but the most I remember is growing up in Midwest Ohio, city of Norwalk, small town.
Which is near what? What's the biggest
Yes,
city?
I would say, yeah, nobody knows Norwalk. It's near Sandusky, where Cedar Point is, about 20 minutes from there.
That still doesn't help. You.
If that's too obscure, let's do Cleveland. We're about an hour
There you go,
west
Cleveland.
of Cleveland.
Okay, great.
That's fantastic. And so, yeah, my family was a family of musicians. Music was a huge part of our life growing up. We all played on the praise team growing up, things like that. And athletics was a big part of my life too. I played football in high school and middle school and wrestled and ran track. I ended up wrestling throughout college as well. Went to college at Northern Illinois University, go Huskies, and that's where I met my wife, Bethany. So it's a little bit of who I am.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'm 61 years old. So married to my wife, Jill. Got 4 kids, all grown, all married, 10 grandkids with several on the way.
Yes.
And we're all going to be taking a vacation together in the next couple of weeks down Outer Banks. And so, we're going to get 2 weeks of intense family time.
I was about to say that's a lot. That's great.
Looking forward to it. But preparing myself as well. Because, I like my space, And, but so I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. Grew up in the South. Played football some, hated it. Stopped playing in 10th grade because there's a whole conversation about like what you like about football. And I love to watch it.
Yes.
But I hated practice. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yes.
So ended up mostly playing soccer. So played soccer all through high school, all through college. Nice. It's a great podcast in and of itself. Just what's the difference between wrestlers and soccer players? They're like two different worlds.
It's a whole different.
And played music some. I played guitar. Played in a band in college. Kind of put it away for years, and then just in the last 3 or 4 years, realized I want to pick it back up again. So I'm trying to teach myself blues guitar.
Nice.
And I really stink, but in fact, I want to write a song like why I can't play.
I was about to say that sounds
song.
very bluesy.
It's a blues song. Yeah, why I can't play guitar. But I still get up there and wail in my room, and my wife just kind of closes her ears and walks away. Did not grow up. We'll talk about some more later, another time. But just did not grow up in the church. Did not grow up as a Christian. Grew up going to church, but really walked away from anything related to Christianity in high school, and so. So it'll be interesting to talk about just difference between what it means growing up in the faith, in a family that's following the Lord and not.
Yeah.
So a little bit about me. We're going to talk about ourselves throughout this podcast because we are very self-oriented. But that's a little bit about us to get us started. JT, why don't you introduce kind of where we're going as we start into this?
Yeah, so we're going to talk through a few different topics. One of them is going to be race and ethnicity. I think the first, 3-4 episodes will be.
Yeah, well, we're actually going to probably, as I was looking at the schedule, we'll probably do a series of about 5. That'll be sprinkled in.
Yeah. So, excellent. Yeah, so we want to jump right into having conversations about race and ethnicity. We want to talk about why these conversations are so difficult. We want to talk about how Christians can approach a topic that comes with such highly emotive and intense feelings and opinions. It's a conversation that I feel is necessary. It's a conversation that I feel is a part of loving your neighbor. It's a part of our call to, Ephesians talks about making every effort to maintain unity. Making every effort doesn't mean doing things that are simple and where unity is easy. Making every effort means making every effort when things are hard. So when we talk about ethnicity, we have to recognize, okay, this is going to be difficult, but in the spirit of maintaining unity, it's something that we need to do and something that we all can grow in how we do that as well.
Yeah. Good. So what we're doing, we've figured out how to talk about this, and we're talking about it in a very charged time. I don't know to what extent this is timestamped, but it's August 2020, the craziness of 2020.
Yep.
Just looking on the news today, and I was okay. This for the first time in history, they may have 2 hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico at the same time. It's like, okay, of course, yeah. You know,
Just-
and fire tornadoes. And,
I was
you
just
know,
thinking about that. Yeah.
you know, and you're like, okay, but so it's a crazy, volatile time,
Yeah.
and so our goal here is not to kind of just add fuel to the fire. Let's just
Right.
kind of stoke things. Nor is it to really kind of, hey, everything's okay, don't worry about it.
Right.
I think what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about why things are hard to do. We want to talk. I think throughout we'll talk about ways to do it, but we want to talk a little about why things are. And some of this came from we've been doing a monthly sort of a live stream talking about stuff as pastors for the church. And the first one we did, we all shared a little bit. JT and Jared Mellinger, our senior pastor, and I all shared different sort of thoughts about it. And so one of the things I did is I talked about how hard it is to talk. And so we thought we would just sort of expand on that and use that as kind of a basis for how we're going to talk about these things. And so what I talked about was, I was just kind of, before that meeting, I was like, how do I do this? And I started thinking about traffic circles. You know, we're Pennsylvania, right across the river from Jersey, and New Jersey's famous for its traffic circles, where those kind of things where you come up on, and rather than having a light, an intersection, you actually have a circle, and you just feed into the circle, and then you kind of drive around it till you get to the place where you're trying to get off, and you get off. And if you're not used to it, it's a pretty crazy experience, because you're there and you got traffic coming, it's flowing. You're flowing into the traffic. You don't, where's my street? How am I? If I missed it, I got to go back around again. And so it's that kind of experience to me that is a lot of what, at least the sense of having conversations about race can be. You just feel like you get into it, and all of a sudden something hits you that you weren't expecting, and now you're trying to react to that. And how do I get out of this? How do I get off this? And I was it sort of made me thinking. Last year, my wife and I did an anniversary trip to England, and in England it's kind of crazy because you fly over like overnight, and you're jet lagged.
Yes.
And you walk out, and they put you in a car. But they, you're like you're getting in on the left hand side. No, you're on the other side. Yeah. So you end up getting on the other side of the car, and like you're on the wrong side of the car, and then they just send you out onto these roads that are like on the wrong side. You're driving on the wrong side of the road, and the wrong side of the car, and you're like, you can't even think.
Right.
Like even if you're alert, it's hard. But when you're, so that the experience is you're driving down this road, and you see this traffic circle, and okay, I've done Jersey. And you're like, no, but I got to go the opposite way. I got to go left, and everybody's coming at me from this direction, and I got to get. And it's just this surreal experience of panic, being in the middle of this traffic circle, not knowing how to navigate your way out. Cars coming from different directions, and so then you get out, and more than once we got out on the wrong road. And Jill's saying we need to go turn around. I said, I'm not going back there. I'm just going to we're going to find out where this road's taking us.
Get out. That's right.
And again, I've had that feeling talking to folks. Not only across racial lines, but even folks like me,
Right.
where you just realize I got into this conversation. I don't know how to get out.
Right.
And I found a way out, and I don't want to go back into it. I don't want to have another one of these.
Yeah.
But we have to.
Right.
We have to be able to have these conversations. We have to be able to drop into them, navigate them, drop out of them. Get intense, get involved at times, or maybe just be able to have experiences where we just get to know each other better. But if we don't do that, we'll never learn.
Right.
And so that's kind of the idea. And so what I talked about in that time was just these sort of these 5 traffic flows that all come into this circle of conversation about race that just inevitably flow in. And we're on one of them, but the other person might be on a totally different one.
Right.
And if we're trying to talk to them as if they're on our flow or our road, we're not going to connect at all. And so the ones we're going to talk about, JT actually are in our next session is going to start us off by talking about the sort of the theology, the issue of theology and how that fits into the race conversations. Which give us maybe 30 seconds on that.
30 seconds. All right. Yeah. I think the biggest miss that we have is how much the Bible speaks to ethnic relations and how much the Bible speaks to reconciling towards one another. I mean, that's what the gospel is. The gospel is, God reconciling us to Himself, of Him doing a ridiculous act of grace and mercy towards us and sending his son Jesus. And we don't just experience that and then leave it at that. There's very real implications of the reconciliation we've received from God. And so that, people call it that vertical reconciliation between us and God has to spill out over into horizontal reconciliation between fellow man. And there's, Jesus talks a lot about love and what that practically looks like. I think something I want to do even in that first episode is talk about, we'll throw on the phrase, oh, we need to walk in love, or we need to show our neighbor love. And it's like, okay, that's great, but that's a big abstract thought that has a lot of legs. And so I want to give some legs to what it looks like theologically to love. I was just reading this morning about, Paul's exhortation when he's writing Romans, and he says, let love be genuine. And then he just lists out all these very specific things of what genuine love looks like. And I'm like, man, if we did these things, these conversations would go a lot better. And I think we would be moving along theologically informed in a way that glorifies God and he can smile on as we're having these conversations.
Yeah. And there's a pretty good chance that our social media feed isn't starting at that point, right?
It's a really good chance.
In case you haven't noticed it. Yeah. I remember A.W. Tozer once said, everything is wrong until God makes it right. And you're kind of getting that place. Our starting point, if it's anything else, we're never going to get right from there.
Yeah.
And somehow we have to learn how to start from where God wants us to start and then work from there.
Yeah. And then also, just on that, there's also just broader theological and biblical categories. Like I think the category of lament is a huge one.
Oh yeah.
I think the category of empathy is something that we all need to grow in. The glory of God and the gospel and humility. Like if we. We can get into it in the next episodes, but those kind of theological categories as well, I think will help in these conversations and how to process some of the stuff.
Yeah, which leads us to what we'll talk about second, which is the experience. We all come into these conversations with our own experiences, and we think we're talking about facts. We think we're talking about reality, but we're talking about reality shaped. Our understanding of reality is shaped by our own experience.
Right.
And so that's where things like lament and empathy and humility and seeking to understand are so important and get lost, because it's kind of like if somebody doesn't get us,
Right.
we can't talk to them.
Right.
And we just don't realize how different a place we come from, particularly in these kind of conversations. And so, and generation plays in that as well.
Yep.
So we'll talk about experience and how your own personal experience is a huge thing.
Yeah.
We come in with that,
Yes.
and we drive through that, in that circle with that in mind, and we kind of evaluate people about whether they really get our experience or not.
Right.
And that becomes a huge wall if we don't.
Yeah.
So and that leads to a third thing we'll talk about, which is historical realities.
Yeah.
This is, as much as it seems like it's a right now issue, everything has historical reality to it, and so not having a historical perspective does not serve us well. And so one of the things we'll talk about a little bit is how do we use an understanding of history to equip ourselves to talk and find ways to talk about things. So that's a big one. People come in and we can be historically ignorant. We can have blind spots. We can, we can have not been taught things. And so just knowing how to orient to that can really help us to know how to relate to the other person.
Yeah, and even the timeline of history plays a huge part of how recent some of these events are, and how long certain things have been going on in this country specifically. Really do help. I always something I always say is that like America didn't get this way in 10 or 20 years. Like it's not like we're going to fix this in the next 6 months. And so I think having that broader span of historical knowledge is really helpful.
And if you drop yourself into a point in time and you're trying to say, are we okay?
Right.
Without an idea of where we've come from, it's very difficult to know.
Right. Yep.
Or where we're going.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge part of it too. So history is a big part of it. Another one is culture.
Yes.
So
Yeah, all kinds of I mean, and that also comes apart brings in a little bit too of coming from where people are coming from too.
Yeah.
Because there's all different kinds of cultures. There's like umpteen amounts of cultures within the black culture itself.
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
not
exactly,
like one
yeah.
black culture. There's
Yeah.
all different kinds of avenues in that. And then, even me growing up in the Midwest, you growing up in the South, there's cultures there too. There's
very much.
family dynamics. There's people are so nuanced and unique and specific that I think we want to just have these broad strokes of who people are.
Yeah.
That would make these conversations easier. It would make it easier to write off people.
Yeah.
But people are uniquely made. God has written each of our stories in a very unique and specific way. And that makes talking about these things more complex because we have to take into account what God has been doing in that person's life, the interactions that person's had, the culture that person's been immersed in. And I think if we miss that, we miss opportunities to love people in hard places or who are coming from hard areas because we're not understanding the culture that has shaped them.
yeah, yeah. And we live in a culture
Yeah.
that's very diverse and is kind of very rapidly evolving. And so we're trying to figure out how we fit into a culture.
Yeah.
I think everybody's doing that. Christians do that because we have another culture
Right.
that we're called to live out of. It's the culture of the kingdom. And yet we live in a culture where there's another kingdom at work.
Right.
And so how do we deal with that? We don't just retreat.
Right.
We can't get immersed, but what do we do? How do we know if the culture is affecting us in ways that
Yes.
that shouldn't affect us?
Right.
How do we critique?
Yeah.
How do we say this is good, this is not good, this is worth, and it seems like everybody's got to. We use a megaphone, which is like my generation thing. But everybody's got a voice,
Yeah.
and all voices sound loud, and all voices sound shrill.
Yep.
And the thoughtful voices a lot of times don't get. You can look at that at your news feed.
I
You
would
can
say
just-
it's the exact same thing you see on your newsfeed.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah,
even
all that
with
clickbait stuff, you just
Yes.
like, okay, get my
Yep. Yes.
I
and
gotta
there's
read about this.
syncretism going on of people morphing and combining ideas in the culture, thinking that they're saying one thing and
Yeah.
redefining of terms. As Christians specifically, we do need to really be on top of just cultural awareness of
Yeah.
where the state of our culture is at, where it's going, and
Mm-hmm.
what's informing and shifting that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
good.
And then that'll kind of drop us down to sort of the last area, which is politics, which we have to talk about.
Yeah.
It's a very intense political season. We've still got a dialogue about how we want to. Once we get close, we're going to be getting close to the election of 2020, and one of the things we want to do is be reading where things are going. So it's one of the hard things about this is you could record a show for 3 weeks from now and realize that show is totally
Yes.
doesn't work anymore. And so we got to talk through how we're going to get to that moment in time in November when
Yeah.
an election takes place.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, we all have an awareness of what's going on in our world and how that election's playing out. But politics is more than just elections. Politics is more than politicians. I mean, politics is about power. Politics is about how power is shared, how it's understood, how it's controlled. It's always been that way.
Yeah.
It was that way in Rome. It was that way. It's been that's the history of politics. Is simply how people share power, how they deal with it, and so we'll have to talk about it because it's a big part of any conversation on race. And race uses politics to define things. And we have to talk about that too. So that'll be one we'll get to as well. So those are sort of the 5 roads: the road of the theology, the road of personal experience, the road of history, the road of culture, and then the road of politics. It's just all those things come into this crazy traffic circle of talking about racial issues and knowing how to navigate in that circle in a way that you end up on the road you should be on or you want to be on is kind of the goal. So that's a little about what we're going to do. It's going to be pretty much just this, us talking. Looking ahead, it'll be, we'll invite other people in.
Yeah.
Folks who we just think have a good perspective, or just folks we'd love to hear from.
Exactly.
Invite some other pastors in. There's people, we know beyond our church who we'd love to get involved in conversations.
Yes.
But the goal is just to spend some time talking and just hashing through stuff.
Yeah.
We are pastors, and our motivation to do this is because we want to care for people.
Yeah.
We hope it's helpful. We hope it's helpful for our folks. We look forward to being part of conversations we have with our folks about this, using it to help people talk about things they don't know how to talk about, giving a reference point. One of the things it does for us, I think, is it gives us some content to give our people to talk around.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not just kind of talking around your own perspective. You actually, what do you think about this? What do you think about?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of an article or a book or a podcast, is it gives you something to talk around that isn't another person's personal thing. It's like you can disagree, you can agree, whatever, but it's not like you're attacking me if you disagree with this podcast. So that's kind of the goal, and we want to do it in a way that honors Christ. We want to do a way that where the Bible is both consciously and referentially used in the way we talk. And if we do that, it'll be worth the time.
That's right.
Great. Good deal.
Excellent.